Inside Stateville Prison, Illinois, overcrowded hell. There is a moment, just before sunrise, when everything appears still. From the outside, Stateville Correctional Center looks like it's holding its breath. Concrete walls, guard towers, coils of razor wire, all of it quiet under the pale morning light. But that silence is misleading. Because inside, long before the sun reaches the yard, thousands of men are already awake. Some haven't slept. Others are listening, to footsteps, to voices, to tension that never quite fades. And in a place built for control, something has slowly shifted. Too many people. Not enough space. Systems stretched thin. This is not just a prison operating under pressure. It is a place where pressure has become the environment itself. And once you step inside, you begin to understand something unsettling. Overcrowding doesn't just change how a prison functions. It changes how people survive. Before we go deeper, take a moment to stay with this story. Subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Because what unfolds inside these walls is not isolated. It reflects something much larger, and what happens next only becomes harder to ignore. A prison designed for order. When Stateville opened in 1925, it represented a vision of total control. Its most iconic structure, the circular F-house, was based on a design known as the panopticon. A concept built around a simple idea: visibility creates discipline. From a central point, guards could observe every tier, every movement, every inmate. At least, that was the theory. In practice, it created something more complex. The architecture itself became a psychological tool. Inmates didn't always know when they were being watched, but they knew they could be. And that uncertainty was meant to shape behavior. But buildings age. And ideas, no matter how carefully designed, don't always survive reality. Over the decades, Stateville evolved, not through careful planning, but through necessity. Populations grew. Policies shifted. Resources struggled to keep pace. And slowly, almost unnoticed at first, the system began to stretch. What was designed for order became something harder to maintain. Because control, in a prison, depends on balance. And once that balance is disrupted, everything else begins to follow. When capacity is exceeded, overcrowding doesn't arrive all at once. It builds gradually. A few extra inmates here. A temporary adjustment there. Until one day, the system is operating beyond its intended limits, and there's no easy way back. At Stateville, cells originally built for one person became shared spaces. Then, in some units, even shared spaces began to feel insufficient. The physical dimensions of the prison didn't change. But the number of people inside it did. And that changes everything. Because space in prison is not just physical. It's psychological. It defines boundaries. It creates distance. And when that distance disappears, tension takes its place. Imagine spending every hour eating, sleeping, existing, within arm's reach of another person you didn't choose. There is no privacy. No quiet moment that truly belongs to you. Even silence feels crowded. And in that environment, small irritations don't fade. They accumulate. A habit that would go unnoticed outside becomes unbearable. A disagreement that would end quickly lingers. And over time, those small pressures begin to shape behavior in ways that aren't always visible at first. Until they are. Morning inside Stateville. The day begins with count. It always does. Before movement, before meals, before anything else, every inmate must be accounted for. It's a ritual of control. A reminder that in this environment, order still exists, at least in structure. Lights come on. Voices echo through the tiers. Inmate count. Men rise from bunks, some immediately alert, others moving slower, still carrying the weight of interrupted sleep. For many, the night never truly ended. Because sleep inside an overcrowded prison is rarely uninterrupted. There are sounds, constant, layered, unpredictable. Voices from nearby cells. Metal clanging. Footsteps moving past at all hours. And sometimes, tension that makes rest impossible. So when morning comes, it doesn't feel like a fresh start. It feels like a continuation. After count, movement begins. Doors open in controlled sequences. Lines form. Breakfast is served, quickly, efficiently, without ceremony. But even here, routine doesn't eliminate risk. Because every shared space is also a point of interaction. And every interaction carries the possibility of conflict. You start to realize something subtle, but important. In Stateville, routine isn't about comfort. It's about containment. The economy of survival. Inside Stateville, there is an economy. Not official. Not regulated in the way the administration might intend. But real. And essential. Items become currency. Food from the commissary. Hygiene products. Services. Even time and protection. In an overcrowded environment, where resources feel limited, value shifts. Something as simple as a snack can carry weight. A favor can become a debt. And debts rarely disappear. They grow. They follow. And they demand resolution. This informal system creates its own structure. Its own rules. And for those who understand it, it offers a way to navigate daily life. But for those who don't, it can become dangerous very quickly. Because in a place where formal systems are strained, informal ones take their place. And they are not always forgiving. Respect and power. Respect inside Stateville is not abstract. It is visible. It is negotiated. And it is constantly being tested. Who you associate with matters. Where you stand matters. Even how you speak matters. Because in an overcrowded prison, identity becomes more pronounced. Groups form, sometimes along familiar lines, sometimes based on shared experiences. And within those groups, there is structure. Hierarchy. Expectations. Power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it's quiet. Understood. Maintained through reputation rather than force. But when that balance is disrupted, the consequences are immediate. Because respect, once lost, is difficult to regain. And in this environment, losing it can change everything about how others see you. And how they treat you. When violence erupts. Violence in Stateville is rarely random. It often begins long before it becomes visible. A disagreement that isn't resolved. A debt that isn't paid. A tension between individuals, or groups, that quietly builds. And then, at some point, something shifts. A moment. A trigger. And what was contained is no longer contained. Fights in close quarters are different. There is no distance. No space to retreat. And when they happen fast. Correctional officers respond quickly, but in an overcrowded environment, response is not always immediate. And even when it is, the effects linger. Because violence doesn't end when the incident is over. It reshapes relationships. It alters dynamics. And it reinforces something that everyone inside already understands: safety here is never guaranteed. Staff in an overcrowded system. For correctional officers, Stateville presents a different kind of challenge. One that is less visible from the outside. They operate in the same crowded spaces. Walk the same tiers. Respond to the same tensions. But from a position where responsibility is constant. Maintaining order requires awareness. Every movement. Every interaction. Every shift. Because when populations exceed capacity, control becomes more complex. And complexity increases risk. Officers must rely on experience, judgment, and communication. But even those have limits. Especially in an environment where unpredictability is part of daily life. And over time, that pressure affects everyone involved. Not just those behind the bars. The weight of constant proximity. There is no true solitude in an overcrowded prison. Even when you are alone in your cell, you are not alone. Sounds travel. Voices carry. Movement continues. And that constant presence becomes part of the mental environment. Some adapt. They learn to filter the noise. To create a sense of distance, even when none exists. Others struggle. Because the human mind is not designed for unbroken proximity. There is a need for space, for quiet, for separation. And when that need is not met, it doesn't simply disappear. It turns inward. Into stress. Into fatigue. Into a kind of tension that is difficult to explain, but impossible to ignore. And over time, that tension shapes behavior in ways that extend beyond the individual. Because in a place where everyone feels it, it becomes part of the culture itself. A system under strain. The infrastructure of Stateville tells its own story. A story of age. Of use. Of systems pushed beyond their intended limits. Plumbing fails. Electrical systems struggle. Repairs are made, but often temporarily. Because the demand never stops. Facilities like this were not built with current populations in mind. And when those populations exceed capacity, wear accelerates. Small issues become larger ones. And larger ones become difficult to manage. But what makes this more than just a maintenance problem is the way it intersects with everything else. Because when the physical environment begins to break down, it affects the human environment too. And that connection is not always obvious, until it is. What this place reveals. Stateville is not just a facility. It is a reflection. Of policies. Of decisions. Of systems that extend far beyond its walls. Overcrowding here is not an isolated issue. It is part of a larger pattern. One that raises difficult questions. About capacity. About purpose. About what happens when systems designed for control are pushed beyond what they can reasonably sustain. And those questions do not have simple answers. Because they are not just about space. They are about people. And the environments they are placed in. As night settles over Stateville, the noise does not disappear. It shifts. becomes quieter, but never silent. Because inside these walls, activity continues. Thoughts continue. Tension continues. And tomorrow will look much like today. But not exactly the same. Because in an overcrowded prison, conditions are always changing, subtly, constantly. And those changes shape everything. From daily routines to long-term outcomes. What remains is a question that lingers beyond the walls, not just how a place like this functions, but how long it can continue to function this way, before something gives. And when it does, what happens next may not be contained within these walls at all. Lockdown. There are moments inside Stateville Correctional Center when everything stops at once. No warning. No gradual shift. Just a sound. An alarm that cuts through every conversation, every movement, every thought. And then, the doors. One after another, slamming shut with mechanical precision. Lockdown. In an overcrowded prison, lockdown is not rare. It can be triggered by violence, by suspicion, by intelligence of something about to happen, or something that already has. But once it begins, the effect is immediate. Movement ceases. Inmates are confined to their cells. Programs stop. Meals are adjusted. Time slows. And the environment, already tense, becomes compressed even further. Because now, whatever tensions existed before, have nowhere to go. Inside a shared cell, two men sit within feet of each other for hours. Sometimes days. No yard. No distraction. Just presence. And whatever unresolved issues were already there. For correctional staff, lockdown is a tool. A way to regain control. But for those inside, it can feel like something else entirely. Because in a place already defined by confinement, lockdown adds another layer. And what happens during that time? Quiet conversations, rising frustration, silent planning, is often invisible. Until the doors open again. And whatever was building, finally finds space to move. The yard. When the doors open again, the yard becomes something more than just open space. It becomes release. Not freedom, but distance. Room to breathe. Room to move without brushing against someone every second. And in an overcrowded prison, that matters. But the yard is not neutral ground. It has its own structure. Invisible lines that divide space. Areas where certain groups gather. Paths that are followed, often without question. New arrivals notice this quickly. Where you stand is not random. Where you sit is not accidental. Even movement has a pattern. Because the yard reflects the internal order of the prison. And that order is maintained not just through presence, but through awareness. Who is watching? Who is waiting? Who is paying attention? At first glance, it may seem calm. Men walking. Talking. Exercising. But beneath that surface, there is constant observation. A quiet understanding that things can change quickly. Because the same space that offers relief also offers opportunity. And sometimes, those two things overlap. New arrivals. Every prison has a moment of entry. But at Stateville, that moment carries weight. Because stepping into an overcrowded system means stepping into something already in motion. New inmates arrive with limited information. They've heard things, stories, warnings, fragments of advice. But none of it fully prepares them. The first hours are about observation. Watching how others move. Listening to how they speak. Trying to understand the rhythm of a place that doesn't slow down for anyone. And almost immediately, there are decisions to make. Who to talk to. Who to avoid. What to say, and what not to say. Because first impressions inside a prison are not easily erased. And in an environment where space is limited and tension is constant, those impressions matter. Some learn quickly. They adapt. They find ways to navigate the system without drawing attention. Others struggle. They misread signals. They underestimate the importance of small details. And in Stateville, small mistakes can carry consequences. Because overcrowding doesn't just increase numbers. It reduces margin for error. Time. Time inside Stateville moves differently. It doesn't pass in the same way it does outside. Here, it stretches. Repeats. Loops back on itself. Days begin to feel similar. Not identical, but close enough that they blur. Morning count. Meals. Movement. Lock-in. And then it begins again. But within that repetition, something else happens. Awareness sharpens. Small changes become noticeable. A shift in routine. A new face. An unusual silence. Because when your environment is limited, your attention expands. And that attention becomes a survival tool. But time also carries weight. Long sentences. Uncertain futures. The knowledge that days are not just passing, but accumulating. And in an overcrowded prison, where conditions amplify every experience, that accumulation feels heavier. Because it's not just time being served. It's time being lived, under pressure. Health and strain. Healthcare inside an overcrowded prison is complex. Demand is constant. Resources are finite. And the balance between the two is difficult to maintain. Inmates line up for medical attention. Some with immediate concerns. Others with conditions that have developed over time. But access is not always immediate. Delays happen. Not always by design, but by limitation. Because when population increases, every system feels it. Medical staff work within those constraints. Making decisions. Prioritizing cases. Trying to address needs in an environment where needs rarely stop. And for inmates, this becomes another layer of uncertainty. Because health, like safety, is not something they fully control. It is something they depend on. And in a system under strain, dependency can feel fragile. Quiet moments. There are moments inside Stateville that are quieter. Not silent, but softer. Late at night. After final count. When movement slows and the day begins to settle. These moments are different. Because they allow space for thought. Reflection. Memory. For some, it's a time to disconnect, to create distance from the environment, even if only mentally. For others, it's when the weight of everything becomes more noticeable. Because without distraction, there is nothing to interrupt it. And in an overcrowded prison, where the day is filled with constant interaction, these moments stand out. They are brief. But they matter. Because they offer something rare. A sense, however temporary, of stillness. The future of Stateville. Stateville has stood for nearly a century. Through changes in policy. Through shifts in population. Through evolving ideas about incarceration. But time leaves marks. Not just on buildings, but on systems. Discussions about the future of facilities like this are ongoing. About renovation. About replacement. About what role places like Stateville should play moving forward. Because the challenges it faces, overcrowding, aging infrastructure, strained resources, are not unique. They are part of a broader conversation. One that extends beyond a single location. And that conversation is not just about fixing what exists. It's about rethinking what is needed. But change, in systems this large, does not happen quickly. And until it does, places like Stateville continue to operate. Day after day. Under the same pressures. From above, Stateville looks structured. Ordered. Contained. But inside, the reality is more complex. It is shaped by numbers that exceed space. By systems working beyond their intended limits. By people adapting to conditions that are constantly shifting. Overcrowding is not just a statistic here. It is an experience. One that affects every aspect of daily life. From movement, to interaction, to thought. And as long as those conditions remain, the question remains with them, not just how to endure. But how long endurance alone is enough. Because pressure, when sustained, does not disappear. It builds. And eventually, it changes something. The only question is what? And when? What happens inside places like Stateville doesn't end at the walls. It lingers, in the system, in the people who pass through it, and in the questions it leaves behind. If this story made you think, stay with us as we continue uncovering realities most never see. Until the next one, stay aware.